At a very high level, this is a slide that gives a bit of a framework for what a plan for success or contingency plan might look like. In the first case, it identifies and defines scenarios, and very often they fall into three categories: safety scenarios, results or outcomes, operational and efficacy results. What we then typically do is take each of these possible results, events, or scenarios and outline a range of types of considerations that are associated with each. So this is sort of a framework that is typically used in order to think through the various scenarios and develop what is ultimately a playbook for all of the potential outcomes in a trial setting. It allows a study team to encounter a scenario, be it good or bad, flip to that part of the book and simply follow the recommendations, guidelines, and decisions that have been reached by a team in advance. There are a great number of risks, as I'm sure you can envision. Some of those are more likely, and some of those will have a more significant impact than others. So some risks could be minimized or averted, and others need to be responded to. But what's most important here is to decide when to act. Taking action often costs. It can cost money, it can cost time and people, and thinking through the consequence of not acting versus the cost of taking action to improve a particular scenario are all key elements of managing risk. I just want to share with you a couple of the success factors that we have observed around contingency planning or planning for trial success. As you've probably gathered, it must be a very comprehensive exercise, one that considers all potential events and outcomes, whether they're positive or negative or perceived to be likely or unlikely. It must be consensus-driven. We see a lot of large partnerships, and even where it is not done in partnership, a lot of functional expertise is involved in leading a study itself. So aligning expectations, securing commitments from partners, and ensuring that a team is really on the same page in terms of how to respond to different scenarios is absolutely essential to this process. Must be coordinated, typically through a project manager, to ensure a central point of contact and harmonization of the planned activities. And finally, much like a TPP, it must be flexible and a living document, revisited as new information is available, as the field changes, and as the trial moves through its various milestones. Planning for success is critical to ensuring that all stakeholders are aligned and prepared to respond to any of the surprises that may emerge along the course of execution of a clinical trial. It can streamline implementation, ensuring that the right scientific next steps and clinical next steps are in place and followed. And finally, and perhaps most critically to some of these situations, is that it can guide communication with the volunteers, with the public, with the medical community. So ultimately, a contingency roadmap, a contingency plan is a way of managing the costs, the way of managing the risks, and a way of ensuring that partners, the public, and participants are managed in the execution of a clinical trial.
Dengue is a major public health concern. The endemic region where the disease is pretty much where half of the world's population lives. So it's a staggering number which gets infected every year. WHO estimates around 96 million people get infected, and 500,000 of those have severe dengue disease. Like HIV, dengue doesn't have a good animal model. There was no known immune correlates of protection. And there was risk of immune potentiation, which had been seen in some clinical studies. In 2000, we started working on a recombinant live attenuated vaccine. And that really changed the profile and the development activities. As soon as we saw in 2007 in clinical studies, high titers of neutralizing antibodies, safety profile was great compared to any other licensed vaccine. Knowing that there is high probability of success, there was accelerated development unless we see strong efficacy data. We don't get into large-scale manufacturing, but here we started those manufacturing, planning for success, planning for, based on this high probability of success, the neutralizing antibody titers and things of that sort. In 2010, based on the spread of the disease, which was noted, FDA also gave it a fast track status. We did initiate production of our vaccine candidate in large quantities early on, even before we had the final trial results. This is a state-of-the-art facility which makes the dengue vaccine. It has the capacity of making up to 100 million doses per year. So right now we have one huge production facility in France, which is making all the dengue vaccine. But we are expanding formulation, filling, and lyophilization activities in the US, and we'll see if we have to expand it to other regions. So the capacity is sufficient with our overriding goal is to ensure access of vaccine to all who need it. The classical way the industry works is by having an innovative technology, having an innovative new vaccine licensed in the US and Europe before it takes to other parts of the world. And when I say US and Europe, I should say North America and Europe, not just US and Europe. Now, for dengue, let me just go through some of the things because I can't read what's there. For the first time, we tried to prioritize access to innovative vaccine for endemic population. We now have this 5-way initiative, a systematic approach to build and sustain vaccine coverage. And you can see there on the side, access can only get you so far. You need affordability, which is key. You need to have awareness that people are willing to come forward, acceptance that I want to take a vaccine, and finally activation that you get to the place or the clinic and take the vaccine. Unless all these activities occur, the vaccine coverage would always be an issue.
RV144 has really set the stage for the work that's going on now under the P5. RV144 was really the first phase 3 trial to suggest that developing an HIV vaccine may be achievable. RV144, as an example, was a partnership. We've talked a lot about partnership in this meeting. A partnership between the US military, the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, two companies, Sanofi Pasteur and at the time VaxGen, more recently subsequent to VaxGen shutting down GSID, and the government of Thailand as well. And it evaluated, as everyone knows, a pox protein prime boost regimen, and demonstrated some modest efficacy with 31% reduction in infection in Thai volunteers. The P5 is made up of representation from the funders. So we have the two major funders, the Gates Foundation and the NIH, clinical trials implementers, the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, and the MHRP for their very important experience with the RV144 trial in Thailand. And critically, two companies that have come to the table, Sanofi Pasteur for the viral vector prime, and initially Novartis, but more recently GSK, as GSK has acquired Novartis vaccines. And the goal of the P5 partnership has been to, as I mentioned, translate the RV144 learnings to South Africa and test modified vaccine components from RV144 that are based on clade C inserts with the goal of both improving the efficacy that was observed in RV144 and ideally prolonging that protection, ultimately, given the incidence, the high HIV incidence in South Africa, our thought is that even a modestly efficacious vaccine that results from this effort might actually achieve impact in high-risk populations. And so thinking ahead and planning for future access to a successful vaccine is increasingly a priority for the P5. The path from establishing vaccine efficacy to licensure and rollout will ultimately be a multi-year and complex process, and so that's what we are thinking about very intensively. There's obviously not a lot of experience in the HIV vaccine field yet around access planning. So the P5 has established what we refer to as a Global Access Committee. The mandate of the Global Access Committee is to guide development of an access plan, and that plan will ideally define expectations and outline commitments that are really essential to making a successful vaccine, if we get there, available to target populations in South Africa and ultimately Southern Africa. The GAC is made up of the funders and the companies, and has been charged with engaging stakeholders in South Africa to, as I mentioned, develop an access plan that reflects both the interests of key stakeholders in South Africa and P5 partners. The access plan is really there to set expectations and provide a roadmap, ultimately for the deployment of an efficacious vaccine. And it's ensuring timely access to a safe and efficacious vaccine ultimately requires a strategy that anticipates public health impact and clearly identifies the target populations for which the highest impact may be achieved. We are actively engaging key stakeholders as we speak in South Africa from different sectors, for example, Department of Health, Department of Science and Technology, Department of Treasury, regulators, trying to really understand what are the perspectives and interests of key stakeholders who will need to be engaged ultimately in access to a successful vaccine, and ultimately understanding those perspectives, and in addition to perspectives of the community. The access plan itself will be a document that will outline the regulatory, the market demand, the technology transfer, manufacturing, and pricing requirements for vaccine access. It will define timelines, principles, and activities required for access, and will help us to secure sustainable commitments to making sure that we can ultimately make a vaccine available to key populations. So the P5 partners are committed to constructing this plan and defining requirements ultimately for achieving timely and sustainable access for populations where a significant public health impact can be achieved.
I'm wondering if you can comment on how the access plan links to the TPP.
We have currently in the TPP an indication that's based on the 702 trial, which will be initially conducted in adults. But it's very clear in talking to stakeholders in South Africa that understanding how and when we'll get to really key target populations in adolescents and young women and girls, that we need to have a path to get from what's in our current TPP to those critical target populations. We've been learning from and discussing examples around HPV rollout and how that's worked and what we can learn from that and piggyback on for potential rollout of an HIV vaccine. I think some other areas in the TPP that are very clearly relevant are around the regimen, for example. The P5 regimen, as it's in the 702 study, is a five-shot regimen because it includes a boost at month 12, and we have to anticipate the likelihood that given the anticipated lack of sustained durability from the vaccine that it would require also subsequent boosting, potentially on an every 2-year basis. And so when you have that in your TPP and then begin to have discussions around planning for access around a regimen that's that complex. It obviously raises lots of questions around how would you actually deploy and deliver a vaccine like that. You know, we're already hearing concerns about the complexity of the regimen, you know, having those discussions really, I think, will help inform how and where the TPP needs to evolve, what the ultimate long-term clinical development plan needs to be, et cetera. And I think the other area that I think is also rapidly being highlighted is cost. We don't know a lot yet about cost, but I think as the access planning discussions evolve, we certainly anticipate policymakers paying a lot of attention to how much the vaccine will cost. Certainly that will impact what we ultimately have in the TPP.
We've talked about how access planning is a very long-term process, and certainly something that runs concurrently with the phase 2B, phase 3 trial. I wonder if you can comment, though, on how much of that initial thinking around access needs to happen even at the point of seeking regulatory approval to move forward with the trial.
We are asking ourselves that very question as we speak, which is what will the regulators want to hear from us in terms of what we are doing to anticipate access in order to provide approval. So seeking early engagement with the regulators to begin to get at those questions so that we can then have the time to be able to develop the answers to those questions in line with the approval timelines is really important. So that's sort of where we are right now. And you know, it looks like the regulatory engagement will happen in the early part of next year. So as the package gets prepared for that, I think we at least I think need to have some general outline of where we're thinking, what we're thinking in terms of access, and be prepared to you know, seek out their input in that process.